Season Johnson is a parent of a kid with cancer going through a journey that has been, many years, and she's learned a lot. So I can really relate to her as my family has gone through a similar situation, and she's been able to use the experience to help so many other people. And this is chocked full of things that we can do to overcome cancer. Season, thank you for jumping on for a call. You were recommended to me by a friend, and I just wanted to visit with you because there's something special, a club that we don't necessarily want to be in, but being the parent of a kiddo with cancer is something that you really just have to live to fully be able to understand it. And so you have taken, the gut punch and turned it into something to be able to serve other people. So as we get in there, introduce yourself and just say how you have been able to embrace, those wounds to create wisdom and help other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. And I love it. There's a special place for, like you said, the small, unfortunately growing group of parents that have walked through something like this. And it just feels like you can instantly just connect with somebody that understands it and gets that gut punch. So my son was diagnosed right before his third birthday with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And up until this point, we hadn't ever gone to the doctor. Like, we had a functional osteopath we would see, chiropractors, and we just really were doing our best as parents, educated. I was a natural practitioner, had studied Dr. Weston Price and just really understood this concept of real food, detoxification, supporting the body, eating whole foods. And so we walked into the diagnosis, fortunately and unfortunately, at different times, being really educated. I say unfortunately because sometimes I think ignorance can be bliss, right? You develop this frustration when you're faced with conventional medicine and the lack of education in the Department of Nutrition and all of that. And so we walked into our diagnosis totally shocked. He was really healthy up until this point from our standard. And as a parent, what you would, watch and see in your child. And we went through standard of care, of course, but we noticed right away, like within the first few weeks, we began implementing a lot of things alongside the chemotherapy. And really none of it was approved because at this point we were fortunate to have colleagues. I had colleagues in my line of work. Actually, some of them were and still are really well recognized in the world of like natural healing. So they came alongside of us and kind of put together a protocol of supplements and a diet and detoxification for us to do alongside chemo that wasn't contraindicated. But of course, the doctors, we can, I'm sure, talk more about that, didn't approve it. So we're doing all of these things while he's getting pumped full of chemotherapy, and he's not experiencing the side effects and symptoms that we were told he would. And you remember, I'm sure, pushing the cart around the floor, or your child walking with the pole, and you're on the oncology floor and you're just looking at these kids and they do not look healthy. They're not vibrant. They're not thriving. And I just remember praying, like, Lord, please don't let this be his reality. Like, what more can I do? How can we help? And so fast forward about 6 months into his diagnosis, he's still not losing his hair. He's just thriving. Like, his quality of life, really outside of all of the pokes and, doctor visits, his quality of life hadn't changed. And so my husband and I were talking, and I'd shared a little bit online about our story, and we had families reaching out, just saying, what are you doing? Like, how can you help us? Or I remember a mom reaching out and saying, my daughter's on hospice. What are you doing? How can I change this? And so it kind of propelled us into this desire to go, okay, what can we do with this? Like, how can we turn this pain into a purpose to serve? And I remember being in the hospital when he was first diagnosed, and somebody gave me a bracelet and it said, God, what are you going to do with this? And I just thought, months later, like, what are you going to do with this? This isn't going to be wasted. I don't want to be a victim to this. I want to use this story. And so we started our nonprofit actually 6 months into his diagnosis. It's called Kick Cancer. And we just started educating families. In fact, we put together an event at a hotel. We rented out, people did a fundraiser for our family. My husband was in law enforcement at the time, and we had great insurance. And so we chose to use that money that was raised to put on this event, and flew, I think we had about 25 families from all over the US fly in. We put them up in a hotel. We brought in our team, the colleagues that were helping us, and a few other special guest speakers to come and talk about raw milk, supplementation, food, CBD. Like, we just covered all of these topics, and that really kicked off this vision of, wow, we can actually help empower families to feel like they are in control and there are things that they can do. And so here we are 10 years later, and my son is 13. He's totally healthy, and really thriving. And we're just, my mission this year actually is, we have our nonprofit. I also have a program where I work really closely with pediatric cancer families. But our mission is to serve 200,000 families this year. There's 400,000 kids diagnosed. I shouldn't say diagnosed. There are 400,000 kids every year in the world that get cancer. Some of those, unfortunately, are never diagnosed because they're in third world countries. Yeah. But our goal is to reach 200,000 of them by giving them hope. And so that could be them listening to this podcast, right? Listening to this episode and feel empowered, or being a part of our program, or maybe receiving our kit from our nonprofit, whatever that looks like. I want to give hope to 200,000 kids, families this year.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's wonderful. So it's so easy to just hit this paralysis, right? When you have a group of doctors walk in and break the news to you that, your baby has cancer. So Lander, actually, he started peeing blood, and then it was bam, 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 stage 4 cancer. And so Wilms was his diagnosis. But you can freeze up and just become a victim, or turn around and focus on what you can control. And so what we did was just started diving in. And the first thing that I think is incredibly important, but I think it goes so much deeper, is nutrition, right? The nutrition division with what is recommended or provided, like we get scans and then get offered ice cream, makes no sense to me, right? Like it's appalling. And so how did you come to terms with that? You obviously had, more of the holistic background going into it, but how did you come to terms with the disconnect there with nutrition?
I never did, and I still haven't. In fact, it literally makes my blood boil. I'm a very non-confrontational person, like peacemaker, but there are some things that get me real fired up, and that's one of them. And I remember, so like you said, I walk in with this, background, and I'm a functional nutritional therapy practitioner prior to his diagnosis. So I walk in with this knowledge. And I remember asking our dietitian, and I was actually asking out of more just curiosity in her response, but hopeful that there would be some additional guidance. I mean, I'm a nutritionist, but I don't know cancer up until this point. I had no idea. And so I was hopeful that she would have this special thing that she'd suggest, right? And so I remember when I asked her, and she laughed, kind of just chuckled and said, "Oh, don't worry about that. All we want is to make sure they don't lose weight." She said, "Everything in our cafeteria and everything we bring in is totally fine." While she's saying that, the other nurse is bringing our roommate, who at the time, he was probably 6 or 7, a Mountain Dew to take his chemo pill. And I remember it was like slow motion all of a sudden, when you're in this, like, what in the world is happening? Like, this woman, I don't even remember the more words that came out of her mouth. I just remember her mouth moving, seeing this other nurse bring a Mountain Dew to a 6-year-old who is not doing well. He has cancer, but not doing good, to take his chemo pill. So I remember the next day, I brought it up to our oncologist, and I said, "Is there a diet you recommend? Is there something that you suggest we do?" He literally also chuckled and said, "Don't worry about it. If he wants," this is quote, "cake, cupcakes, French fries, it's all available in the cafeteria. Please make sure he eats." Then it was at that point where I'm like, we're screwed. Are you kidding me? Like, this is what they're telling us. And And so again, like you said, it was kind of like turn off the victim, turn on the what is my mission? Like how am I gonna help these other families who are being told the same thing? I remember actually, and I don't know if you had this experience, but did he ever have to do lumbar punctures? No.
No.
Okay. So through leukemia, part of the treatment, it's a standard 3.5 years for boys. Actually, I think that's changed now. It's a little bit less. And part of treatment is they do a lumbar puncture where they put chemotherapy into the spine. And the problem is, of course, the chemotherapy can travel and cross the blood-brain barrier, right? So I remember our first LP, we're sitting in there and they do, local, and he's falling asleep and we were allowed in the room for those. And I remember the nurse saying, when he wakes up, and mind you, he's 3, when he wakes up, he's going to have a little headache because the chemo gets into the brain and it can, I'm like immediately like, are you kidding me? Chemo's getting in his brain. And she said, so here's what we suggest. You can either go through the Starbucks. There's a Starbucks right down the street when you guys are leaving and get him like a Frappuccino, something that a 3-year-old would love the taste of that has caffeine in it, or give him a Diet Coke. And she said the diet's probably better because, there's less sugar. And she goes, it's really the caffeine that's going to help. And I just was so sick to my stomach. And again, I knew better, but I remember in that moment thinking of the thousands of parents that are told the same information. But like you said, they're paralyzed and they're fearful. And so they're trusting the doctor and they're trusting the nurses and they're doing whatever they say. And so we got a second opinion. I thought, okay, this can't be reality. There's maybe another hospital that does this better. And I had a former boss who's a very prestigious individual, very well known. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, do you have any connections to CHLA, which was Children's Hospital Los Angeles? And he goes, I do actually. I donated there and I know that the head of pediatric oncology. I said, could you get me a meeting? So a couple of days later, we're sitting in this gentleman's office and you can see in his office, celebrities all over the walls and all these awards and accolades. And I'm thinking, okay, this is it. Like, this is where maybe the really wealthy, educated people bring their kids. So he's got to have a better protocol. And I ask, and my husband and I are sitting shoulder to shoulder across the table. And I said, so I understand that, they have to go through the same protocol, but is there any leniency with like, what if my child's doing well? And I'm asking him these questions. He said, no, standard of care. So then I said, the most important thing I want to know is diet. Like, what do you suggest with nutrition and diet? Because I've been given some really poor advice. And he said the exact same thing. He said, diet doesn't matter. What you're feeding your child during cancer is the least of our concerns. We just want you to feed them. My husband actually he must have felt my body like tense up. I don't know if he was afraid that all of a sudden I was going to go aggro, but he grabbed my hand under the table and like tightly, almost to hold me down. And I don't know if I would have done anything, but he could feel it, like that I was like, this is the reality. Yeah. So yeah, it's still, it's still just like that.
Yeah, no, it's really bad. And it's such a fundamental aspect of all of it that I just wish that would be the first step, right? The first step on the journey. And I think that's why what you do is so important. It's like, this is not the end all be all, but it's such a monumental piece of the puzzle and getting that right. So before we go into some things that we can implement, I want to know your thoughts or your theories around why a baby is getting cancer and what do you think cancer is? What theory do you subscribe to with cancer?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and this is so hard, as a parent. How old was your son when he was diagnosed?
5.
Yeah. It's so hard as a parent to even parents that are listening right now that maybe have a child that's going through cancer. And because number one, you blame yourself immediately, right? I'm thinking as the mom, what could I have done different? My husband's praying that God would give it to him instead of my son, right? And so we're in this world of blame and guilt and not sure what's going on. And so I know that this is kind of a harsh reality. But unfortunately, there are plenty of studies that have proven that cancer is 95% or more environmental and only about 3 to 5% genetic. Now we know genetics work with the environment, and that's epigenetics, which we can talk about. But if we understand that most cancer is an environmental problem, then it's the environment that we're living in that's actually creating disease. And so it's actually really, we could look at that and say, like, oh, wow, so I did give my son cancer. No, I'm not that powerful. However, did I make choices that could have contributed to this diagnosis? Yes. And that's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow. However, the beautiful thing about this truth is it should empower you. Because if we know the environment created it, then that means the environment can change it. Right. And so if we know that toxins and bad diet and electromagnetic frequencies and all of these things surrounding us have contributed to a child getting cancer, then we can clean up our diet. We can clean up our home environment. We can stop putting toxins in their body to actually really help them heal. So it's an environmental problem. And this is why babies, even newborn babies, like our friend that introduced us. I mean, her son was so little when he was diagnosed. And so the umbilical cord blood of a mom shows an outrageous number of toxins in it. They tested umbilical cord blood. And so we know our babies are getting exposed. And so the beautiful thing about that, though, that information is that we can change it. And so they're getting cancer at this young age because of our environment. Now, what is cancer? And that's the way I answer it is actually really simple, because we can overthink it. And your son had Wilms, my son had leukemia. There are so many different cancers now. But cancer is actually a symptom. And I don't like saying that without a little bit of preface, because I think some parents can get offended and be like, you're telling me my son who's laying in a bed bald, getting pumped full of toxins, it's a symptom? But again, like, if we look at it that way, it's so empowering, because we go, okay, so cancer is a symptom of something that went wrong, and it manifested into a specific tumor or small tumors in the blood. And we've put a label on it: Wilms, leukemia, lymphoma, sarcoma, whatever that is. But what caused it in the first place? Cancer is not a chemotherapy deficiency. Your son didn't get cancer because he needed radiation. That's not how God created us. So the fact that we look at cancer and go, it's a symptom of something that's gone wrong. And most commonly, it's nutritional deficiency. It's an overburden of toxins in the body. And there are some genetic mutations that can be involved. And the good news about the genetic piece is we know with nutrition and detox, we can actually change those genetics. That's incredibly empowering. So if we recognize that's what cancer is, it's a symptom of a bigger problem, then we can't just cut, poison, and burn. We can't just have surgery, radiate, and poison with chemotherapy. We need to do that because I mean, if I'm honest with you, I do think that chemo, radiation, and surgery can absolutely play a role. I totally do. For everybody, no. I think we need to treat people individually. Leukemia, chemotherapy is actually very effective. However, the problem is we're not also addressing the underlying cause. We're not improving their nutrition. We're not looking at, are they detoxing well? We're not removing the toxins from their environment. So that's probably a very simple explanation, but I think I work with moms and dads so closely that sometimes it's also overwhelming, that's the easiest way to really break it down and understand.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that what that is, though, is cancer is an energy deficiency, is what I have come to terms with. It's
Yeah.
simply that the mitochondria is in dysfunction for heavy metal toxicity deficiencies. Name the cause, and I think it's a plethora of them, but it's energy deficiency. So one aspect of that I want to get into on the nutrition and diet side is, I believe, and so like Naisha has been on, Naisha Winters,
Yes.
the metabolic aspect is extremely important to get. And what I think is actually going on the nutrition side when we are having success is essentially a deuterium depleted diet. I think that is key. That's why keto works. That's why carnivore works. It's the
Yeah.
deuterium depleted. And so when you understand that aspect of it, all this processed crap makes no sense, right? Like it absolutely none. So we throw in this deuterium piece, we're creating mitochondrial dysfunction. Now we throw in these processed stuff with the glyphosate that's going to throw off everything, right? Like that's a nightmare. Stephanie Seneff has been on. She's done an amazing job, I think, of breaking that out. And so we're having these layers that are connected to nutrition based off
Yeah.
of the production of them. So where do you start on, hey, here we are. What is that first step to adjusting? And if you disagree with anything I said, just go with it.
No, I 100% agree. It's so true. And like you said, that's what I love Dr. Nisha Winters, all the work she's done. I'm actually in her program to become a metabolic trained practitioner. I'm almost done with it. But the metabolic theory is, you're exactly correct. And so if you're looking at, and I get this question, unfortunately, more than I would like. And it's, my son has cancer. My daughter has cancer. Where do I start? And I always start with nutrition. Actually, I would say I take that back. I back up a little bit, and I first say to stop, breathe. And rarely do I find somebody, I probably more often than not, actually, because my son's journey, it's been 10 years. And, so I've been on social media and had my website for a while. So I do have, unfortunately, families that have followed me for years, and their child ends up getting cancer. And so that's a great place, because when somebody is brand newly diagnosed, one of the best advice I could give them is take a hot second, step back. Very rarely is a child's diagnosis critical, or the state that they're at when they're diagnosed, is it a critical situation? Sometimes, yes. I know one of the families in my program, her son was in a critical situation. That is like 1% of the time. There is so many times parents are rushed into treatment before they even have an accurate diagnosis. So many times parents are forced into working with a practitioner out of fear because they got this diagnosis. But even just the energy between the two, the energy exchange between the oncology team, and it's not good. So I'm a big proponent of taking a step back, taking a week or two, waiting for an official diagnosis, because sometimes they don't tell you that. And then they get the report back and it could be different. And make sure you feel comfortable with who you're working with. So that would be number one. But then the second thing I say comes back to this question about nutrition. And nutrition has everything to do. So the simple thing, you and I both know there's like a million things to do, but that's overwhelming. So the first thing I say is take out the sugar and incorporate organ meats. And that, for some people, they're like, hold on. Like, my kid eats chicken nuggets and hot dogs. So you're telling me to give him beef liver? But there's a lot of really, really creative ways to get it in. There's also capsules or supplements you can have them swallow. We love, for little kids. In fact, Ashlyn's son is one of my favorites, because he's been so cooperative, and she's had to get really creative with how he's little, but she opens organ complex capsules and mixes it in his milkshake, his healthy milkshake. You can get really creative. But the thing about organ meats is it has a lot to do with actually helping that energy production. It has a lot to do with actually pumping the body full of the vitamins and nutrients that are going to quickly be depleted from treatment. And if we want our mitochondria to be in good health, we have to give it a source of fuel. But unfortunately, the chemo, the radiation, the surgery just strips it. And so this is why, like, carnivore and keto is so incredible, because you have a lot of those vitamins. So remove the sugars except for fruit. And on occasion, and listen, there is certainly time and place for like a little bit of maple syrup, pure maple syrup, a little bit of raw honey. We're dealing with kids, and they're going to have a birthday, and they're going to want to still have a real life, right? But for the most part, removing processed sugars and incorporating organ meats. That would be the two things that I suggest right away.
I think that's beautiful. One of the things that I did really early on with Landers, that we actually, it took me a long time to get to where I am now, and I've changed like a lot on just based on the understanding, right? But I read the China study, like was one of my very first books. And so I was terrified. I thought meat was causing cancer and milk and all these things were going on, right? That's how I started it. And so we did remove vegetable oils and sugars and flours right out of the gate, but it was still, he was plant based until I started really getting some more layers. And Stephen Gundry's Plant Paradox was the first one that opened my eyes to plants to have toxins. What?
Yeah.
And so as that went on and went on and went on, I've gone all the way to the extreme of carnivore, but not for no reason, just based on understanding how the body and systems work. And so what I did was had heart and liver added to the ground. So I own a farmer's market. That's my day job. It's like a grocery store. And so what I would do is I had my farmers take the heart and liver and add a 15% blend to it, and we'd have ground. And so we'd just make burgers or make whatever type of dish with that ground. And that is such an easy way, and we call it ancestral now.
Yeah.
And it's a huge, huge seller for us, and it's still what we use. But I think you're spot on with the organ recommendation, removing sugars. And again, sugar, high deuterium food, extremely high, throws off metabolic function, does so much more than what any of the food gurus think. But the mineral deficiencies are huge, right? Like absolutely huge. And liver is one of the only ways in our diet we can get copper. And so when we understand that energy production and understand copper, now we understand the importance even more of liver. So what's your next little tip to getting in some of those nutrient dense foods?
Yeah. So that was the next suggestion, is removing like vegetable seed oils, removing flours, grains. Another really big one is magnesium. This is unfortunately there is a direct correlation, and you can find these studies all over. For those of you that like PubMed or going to, the official sites, you can find that chemotherapy depletes magnesium, and magnesium is like almost every system in our body is dependent on it. And when we recognize some of these things that are depleted, that's the first thing that I recommend bringing back in and supplementing with. Fortunately, there's liquid options, there's capsule options, food sources. I'm always like, ideally, I work with kids. So the best thing is when you can get your nutrients from the food. And so eating magnesium rich foods, which by the way, like you said, red meat actually has magnesium in it. And so there's, dark leafy greens, sure, but your child's going to eat a steak over a salad because they are actually intuitive and they know what their body needs. And so magnesium rich foods, supplementing with magnesium, that's really, really important. And then here's the other piece. While this next part isn't necessarily the nutrition, it's actually the digestion and absorption of these nutrients. And so when we think of their guts housing the majority of their immune system, right? We look at over 85% of the immune system is inside the gut. And we need their immune system to be working. That's what actually keeps you and I from developing a tumor, is our immune system. We are creating cancer cells all day long. But our environment and our immune system is what's actually destroying the cells before they can grow into a tumor. And so if we understand this, we need to support our immune system, and our kids need their immune system supported during treatment. Unfortunately, protocol for leukemia, I don't know if this is the same for Wilms, and it also kind of changes often, but for leukemia, it's prophylactic antibiotics every week for 3.5 years.
Yep. Yep.
That is so ass backwards. It's archaic. It is the most insane concept, because now what we're doing is we are actually paralyzing the immune system, and it doesn't know what to do and who to fight. And so
insanity.
And I just told my group that I'm working with of cancer families, I said, mark my words, I do believe in the next, I'd like to say 5 years, in the next 10 years, that will be no longer a part of protocol. I have to believe that. I just don't understand how it still is. But if we understand the immune system is a big part of it, then we look at the nutrition aspect of how to support that. And it's really supporting our gut microbiome. And we do that through fermented foods. We do that through probiotic rich foods. And of course, supplementing with probiotics is important, even though your oncologist will tell you not to. That's a whole nother topic. But things like sauerkraut, kefir or kefir from a really clean, raw, ideally source, unsweetened, cultured yogurts. For a lot of kids have dairy issues because their body just isn't breaking it down. And if you don't have access to a really good quality raw milk yogurt, or you can make it at home, there's a brand called Cocoyo, and it's a coconut milk yogurt that's actually alive. It's so fermented that when you take the top off, it like kind of pops. And I love that. In fact, I think Ashlyn loves to give Brooks that. So there's a lot of different foods, fermented foods, that will help kind of support that gut bacteria and the microbiome to help the immune system fire and to help you digest and absorb these nutrients that you're eating.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. So Lander was on a regiment that included vincristine as kind of that top one, and that is known for having all the chemo-induced neuropathy, all of these issues, right? And think Dave Asprey, when I was first trying to learn whatever I could, was a huge resource for me. And the Bioptimizer guys were on, Wade Lightheart, and just talking the importance of magnesium. And so that led me down to Carolyn Dean's work with magnesium. And so Lander was on magnesium very, very early on. None of the vincristine side effects at all. None.
Wow, that's awesome.
So I really think that you're spot on. When you look at the studies, it does deplete magnesium, and magnesium for nerve function and literally everything. But I think that is crucial. And so I look back, and I had a really respected guy ask me the other day, what would you change? Would you change anything? I was like, well, yeah, like in a perfect world, I'd change all kinds of stuff, but I wouldn't have learned, right? Like I wouldn't have learned any of this if we would have had these answers. So I got lucky on a whole lot of things, and other things would really like to be able to go back and change with that. But to your point with magnesium, I agree wholeheartedly. It's crucial. The gut microbiome, I think that we still only know a drop in the bucket about the microbiome. And then when you throw in the complexities of that with the myco, right, the fungal side of it, we know even less. And so all of this comes in. So I said all that to say the raw milk for me is something that I've just not convicted one way or another with active cancer. So I wanted to pick your brain a little bit on that with what you've seen, because that one scares me a little bit, especially on non-raw, right? Like, because that's trash. That's not even food. People need to quit, just eat altogether, get rid of that. If it's not raw, don't drink it. But what is your experience on that? Because I see absolutely both sides of that. And I'm talking about not for just anybody, active cancer and raw milk.
Yeah, I love that you asked this because it does need clarity. So we were fortunate enough. I don't know if you know who Mark McAfee is. He is the owner of the largest. Okay, awesome. Yeah, my family knows him as Papa Mark. We've been connected to him for years and years. In fact, when I lived in a little tiny town, I was the milk lady. He would fly his little plane in to deliver the milk to our town, and I'd have the co-op pick up. It was this whole thing. So we got introduced to raw milk when my daughter was born. We adopted my daughter at birth. And this is before I was educated. I mean, I had common sense because I remember looking at formula cans days before she was going to be born going, what the hell is this? Like, I cannot get this to a baby, right? And so fortunately, we had friends and family that were like, hey, have you looked at the Weston Price raw milk baby formula? So that's what we fed her from day one. This child, it's a whole nother story. I mean, that completely changed her life. So we've been exposed to and drinking and consuming raw dairy from the beginning. But here's the key. Is raw dairy good for everybody? No. Is carnivore good for everybody? No, not everybody, not at every stage of life. So I guess I should preface that. Is raw milk good for everybody? No, and not at every stage of life, right? And it's because if I put a person on raw dairy with a really weak immune system, and they got their raw dairy from some farm that isn't following standard of practice that they need to follow for cleanliness, that can be concerning. If I put somebody on a carnivore diet and they don't have stomach acid because they've been a vegetarian for so long, that's going to make them sick. We've got to build up. So I need to build up the weak immune system to the raw dairy, and I need to build up the weak gut to carnivore. So could raw dairy benefit everybody? Yes. Does carnivore benefit everybody? Yes. But you got to get them there. And so to your point, if we're looking at active cancer treatment, this is where I say for my California families that we work with, Mark, that's where his farm is. And unfortunately, you can't ship raw dairy over state lines. You can ship cocaine. You can definitely like ship prostitutes, but raw dairy is going to put you in jail. So if you are in California, you have access to Raw Farm, which is the name of his dairy, and all of their raw milk products. And yes, it is clean. Like I've been to the dairy. Mark is actually somebody that would tell you. He told us this when we moved to Mexico. We found it where we get all of our meat, our ancestral blend, and our raw dairy. There's a farm in Mexico we get it from. And I asked him, I texted him like, hey, what do you think? He goes, go to the farm, FaceTime me when you're there. Like I don't want you to just go get raw milk until you see it. So the reason raw milk could be problematic for a low immune system is because there is going to be live bacteria present, most of it good. But if the farmer isn't taking care of the cows, the cleanliness isn't correct, if they're feeding the cows a bunch of grain, that's not going to produce a healthy raw milk. And so it could be problematic. So the point being is know your farmer, know how they're doing it. And then the next piece is we don't drink milk. We don't drink raw milk. When my daughter stopped her formula, we're not a milk family. We love good yogurt. We love good cheese. We love good butter and kefir. So those are the raw dairy products that we consume. And so for a family that's like their kid loves dairy and they're in active treatment and their kid's inherently picky, right? And we know taste buds change during treatment. The best source of dairy to feed them, if you're giving them some cheese, you're giving them some butter, which I hope you're giving them a lot of butter, or kefir, however you say it, then find a good quality source from a good farm that is clean. But yes, you have a good point. Like you can't just make blanket statements. And this is you and I both know with the internet and influencers that there's just one way to do it. But that one way might not be appropriate for that one person at that time. So raw milk, yes, is it safe? Most often, but you can't say it always is because I don't know the farmer. Right. But like you said, do not give your kids pasteurized dairy ever, but especially during cancer treatment. No pasteurized dairy.
It's crucial. Like it's absolutely crucial, which goes back to as we started the conversation with what they're offered is that's exactly what it is. It's about as bad as it gets across the board, not just on pediatric oncology offices. But all right, so I want to go a little bit of a tangent because I think that what you have done by moving south is absolutely brilliant from a health perspective. Absolutely brilliant because when we understand all these diets and the categories and the boxes, the rules that I've come up to season are local, seasonal, natural, right? That's going to be different for every place in the entire world, right?
Yeah.
Based on latitude, based on all kinds of things. So local, seasonal, natural. And by natural, I mean not covered in pesticides, not a Franken fruit, right? It's going to be how God made it as close as we can, right? And again, I own a farmer's market. Produce is the number one thing that I do. And we are so far away from what produce was. They're night and day. So the light component is something that nobody seems to really be getting the magnitude. And in my opinion, it is even more important than food. And so it's that disconnect. And when we start piecing together the vitamin D aspect and cancer, right? Normal vitamin D levels come with a very reduced chance of having cancer, right? So being optimized. Well, we're not optimized because we're not embracing the circadian aspect of light. And so I said all that to say, where are you in that realm? What kind of practices do you do? Or is it, hooey?
No, that's so true. And it's funny you say that. And this is a plug for Mexico. I shared our story before we hit record of why we got down there, but we weren't intending to make it long term. We just wanted a few months. And we started to learn a few things that were really fascinating. One of them was, Mexico doesn't allow GMO. The only GMO we have in the country is imported from America in the Doritos bags and the cereal. And no joke, it's actually quite comical. There's no 5G on the Yucatan Peninsula, which is where I live, and they don't allow chemtrails. And so there's these things where you're like, so interesting, because Mexico, we don't, I think, and this is a very just dumb statement, but I don't think Americans look at Mexicans as like cutting edge and really intelligent, health focused. But yet they're smarter than us because they've made these changes in the environment. And so, we've been in the States now. We're visiting family and friends for a week, and my family's like, why does our gut hurt? It's so interesting. Like, and we're healthy. We eat, even when we're traveling, we eat healthy. But so to come back to your question, light, your environment has everything to do with it. And so one of the things that we've noticed is, living by the beach, you're real motivated to get up in the morning to watch the sunrise. And we've taught our family, we don't wear sunglasses anymore. This has actually prevented us gringos from getting sunburned. And of course, yes, you can still get sunburned, but when you remove glasses, you're actually allowing your body to do exactly what it's supposed to, not just from a protection standpoint, but also from a circadian rhythm standpoint, which has everything to do with your sleep cycle, your detox cycle, your digest cycle, right? So light is huge. One of the things we tell families is get your kid outside in the morning light every single day, barefoot ideally, unless you spray your grass with Miracle-Gro, then either stop spraying it or put rubber boots on. But yeah, light is huge. And also this eating seasonally and locally. What's really interesting about that is we've never been a fruit family. We've always lived in the mountains, and fruit just isn't, I'll buy bananas and apples at the store, berries, but it's just never been something we've as a family eaten a lot of. Since moving to Mexico, my afternoon snack, I get so excited to have papaya or mango or all of these local fruits, and my whole family is like craving it. And so we have shifted a little bit of our diet. Like we eat a lot of meat, we eat fruit, and we just don't really do we don't do breads. We used to do a lot of sourdough when I lived here, but we don't do a lot of it there. So we have kind of transitioned, and we've noticed that the impact on our health. Our vitamin D levels are good. Getting outside, getting that sunshine exposure, huge, not slathering yourself with sunscreen. We joke about our area. A lot of vacationers come and you can spot them a mile away because they're covered in sunscreen, and you're just like, oh boy, this is going to be a rough week. Or they're just toasted. They're super sunburned, look like a lobster. But your body does acclimate to your environment if you allow it by feeding it the food local to that environment and participating in the local activities.
I am so glad you're there, because that is something that a lot of times as we get into that topic, people look at me like I have three eyes. They're like, what? Light can't be that important, right? But it is so unbelievably important. And so it makes me so happy that you're there. I think there's a lot we still have to learn. We've a lot more work we've got to do, but that, to me, for whatever it's worth, it gives you an extra seal of approval in my book in helping all these families and sending people your way, because that's, if we're not going to address that, my opinion, we're no better than what the oncology departments are doing when they're giving kids ice cream.
You know what? And this is just as equally important for the parents or the caregivers. One of the things that I teach families is, they have to feel well to be able to serve their family well and to take care of them well. And one of the first things that I tell them to do, there's two parts to it. One's a little more difficult, is number one, get outside morning light ASAP. First thing in the morning, as soon as you wake up. If you wake up before the sunrise, turn on light. But go out as soon as the light is up, get outside and be in the light. And making sure that the parent is not drinking coffee right when they wake up. So you need to give your body. So we talk about circadian rhythm with light for the child and for the parent. Like that sets the tone of what their body's going to do that day, how it's going to rest, how it's going to restore, digest. But when you wake up and you go right to the coffee pot, you drink coffee, you are stopping the natural process of your body spiking cortisol. And you saw this thing called adenosine that is the part of what is needed to keep you in restful state. That has to wear off naturally. If it doesn't wear off naturally, because you drink coffee right when you wake up, 10 o'clock's going to roll around. You're like, oh, I need another cup of coffee. It's because the adenosine was able to kind of come back and like start to wear off again, right? So light and waiting 30 minutes at least for coffee is huge.
To add to that morning routine that has been really eye-opening lately is in understanding leptin and leptin resistance. Having a good fatty protein breakfast, after that window, maybe with that cup of coffee, right, 45 minutes after waking up, because all of those hormones are unbelievably interrelated and dependent on light as well. So I think the leptin and cortisol connection, I think that is massive.
Huge. And again, I think this is what happens is hopefully people will hear this, that this is all like such new information, right? Like what organ meats, number one, and now we're talking about leptin, like what I think it's so important to choose where are you going to start? And what are you going to do with this information? Like you chose to listen to this episode. So what are you going to do with what you learn? And a lot of times it can feel overwhelming, right? Because you and I have been here. We've been studying this and doing this for years. They may be starting. And I think one of the first things I would tell you if you're overwhelmed or you're like, where do I begin? Begin with morning light. Begin eating local to your area. Begin removing the crap that comes in a box or in a bag that you got in the middle aisle of the grocery store. And just start there. And then you're going to turn into all of a sudden the local neighborhood expert. And people are going to be like, hey, wow, your energy is great. You look great. And then you're going to deep dive into things like leptin, and you're going to deep dive into all these different things like adenosine and go, oh my gosh, there's so much to learn. It's kind of, I always say it's kind of like reading the Bible. The more you read it, the more you realize you don't know. That's how I feel like with health, this field, you're like, just when you think you're getting there, you're like, I have no idea what's happening. Yeah. There's so much out there.
Man, I could not agree more. It almost makes me, paralyzed to even put out recommendations and new content, because it's like we don't know anything on the grand scheme. We know enough to realize what got us here is a disaster, but the opening Pandora's box on the other side. But I hope anybody that's listening to this really gets that there's so much hope. And by focusing on the things that we can control and doing the best that we can, not having regrets, just keep moving forward, it is paramount to getting our babies and ourselves better.
Absolutely. Yeah. You said something too that I get asked a lot. If your friend asked you, what would you have done different? And this question comes up, would you, now knowing what you know, would you have not put him through conventional care? And while you and I both know we don't have a choice in the States to do that, you're forced by law. Sure, could you have left the country? That's a whole nother thing. But I look back and I go, just like you said, I wouldn't have changed a thing, because it was such a beautiful opportunity to learn. And also, I wouldn't have a voice for these families who are walking through this horrific experience. If I had my son and we were in Mexico doing natural treatment, how could I relate to them? There's no connection there. But we were able, just like you're doing with using your voice, we were able to walk through this and do it a better way and show and prove that this can be done different. We can actually do so much with our control, right? And so being willing to step into something and go, no, I'm not going to be passive. I can take control in this. but also be willing to learn and be willing to be humbled. That's the other thing. Like, I walked into our diagnosis with a chip on my shoulder because I was a natural practitioner. We don't need medicine. We don't need all of this, right? And then talk about being humbled and going, oh my gosh, I never thought I'd be in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to visit. This has been truly a blessing. Very grateful for this time. So where can we go find out more about what you do, or if somebody wants to work directly with you, what are those steps and where can they go?
Yeah, so the best couple places, my website has a lot, seasonjohnson.com. That's where you can find my podcast. It's called the Thrive Through Cancer podcast. I also have a program where it's called the Thrive Through Cancer Formula, where I work directly with families and myself and our functional medicine doctor, Dr. Pennick, where we coach them through this diagnosis in a group setting, which is actually beautiful because healing happens in community, and knowing you're not alone, and knowing there's 25 other moms in this Zoom room going through the same thing you're going through is really beautiful. So you can really find all of that on my website. My social media is, my Instagram is @SusanJohnson. I respond to all the messages, so please reach out to me there. And we also have our nonprofit, and that's kickcancermovement.org. There's some really great resources and initiatives that we're doing with that as well.
I love it. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this, and I appreciate you having me on and letting me share with your audience.
Thank you for joining us on Sowing Prosperity. Be sure to follow along across the social media platforms, including YouTube, and be sure to go to sowingprosperity.com.